It's absolutely mind-boggling why anyone would go out, pay money, put themselves on the public scene in order to antagonize, to provoke, and to literally hurt others. I mean, this act that was carried out by this Danish person, Rasmus
Paludan.
I mean, apparently he does this regularly.
He's a serial
Clearly.
lunatic who has been going on a tour.
Attention seeker.
He's going around on a tour. He calls it the sort of anti-Islam tour, and he goes around and to various spots.
Burning these copies of the
But
Quran.
you've got to go back to this guy's roots. He's a very disturbed individual. I'm not giving him excuses. He's been found guilty of many crimes. Sexually motivated crime, stalking a person.
This is official.
Of course, he was given 5-year restraining order for stalking a person in his youth. He has been charged, or he has been accused of speaking to minors with sexually graphic conversations on chat rooms. He has been charged with racial crime several times in Denmark and in Sweden. So this man is not a normal person. If we were to normalize his behavior and say, well, he's burning the Quran, therefore there must be some intellectual credence behind him, actually there isn't. It's just a zero, hollow, foolish individual who is just desperate for attention.
I have to challenge you a little bit on that, Ajmal. It's totally true what you say about this person being slightly unhinged and being on something of a crusade.
I think you're being very generous.
Yeah, I'm being generous. But the reality is that there has been a very brutal, extreme shift to the right in Sweden. I mean, Sweden used to be a bit like Holland, a very liberal,
whole of
tolerant
Scandinavia.
society.
I remember 10 years ago, Sweden being either the first or second most liberal, most welcoming of minorities, most welcoming of immigrants. What happened over the past decade?
You had the influx of migrants in 2015 and there onwards, and that happened across Europe. There were people flexing all over and animated about trying to find ways to stop this, what they call the flood of migrants from North Africa and elsewhere. And Sweden took its share of migrants fleeing from conflict zones, as well as those who might be economic as well. But what you then had, and this is a direct result, was a massive shift in popularity for groups that were known to be neo-Nazi organizations. They now have a hold in parliament, which has never before been seen in Sweden. They have a huge percentage of the seats in parliament.
And this, by the way, is representative of what's happening across Europe, it seems.
Yeah, there's a whole pattern across Europe. So the Pegida movement, which is obviously promoting Islamophobia, to be honest, is very started in Germany. So we are seeing the party with about 15% of the votes in parliament, represented in parliament. We're seeing the same pattern in Scandinavia. I mean, Rasmus, his name, I mean, in German, it sounds like Rassismus, which is racism. I think the name is even telling enough. He's the leader of the party called Stram Kurs. Stram Kurs means like tight direction. Even the word stram is very, comes from, you know, if you speak German or Scandinavian languages, you know where it comes from. It's a very dark, racist, neo-Nazi type of naming. So it's very sad to see that the Swedish government is actually giving this type of, you know, ludicrous people the platform to express very dangerous views across on a public platform in front of the Turkish embassy. And that's probably, we'll talk about that as well. Why now, and why in front of the Turkish embassy?
And I'll add to that, why, I mean, since he's been a serial arsonist, apparently it seems, why this particular incident caught, you know, the attention of the media and caught everyone else's
Well, I would like
attention.
to suggest that he's been doing it consistently and regularly, but it's in the backdrop of an atmosphere that has been overwhelming Sweden in the last few months, where they have, first of all, banned Islamic schools. This was a bill was brought in
And this is very strange because this is the very same Sweden. When I went there 10 years ago, Islamic schools were thriving. Islamic communities in Malmo, in Stockholm, in Kista. I even got my book translated into Swedish because it was so much in demand. And here we have, in 2022 election, there has been a definite shift from the liberal Sweden, I call it the tree-hugging, the environmentally friendly, very open and inviting Sweden, to this right-wing politics. I echo what Carl was saying. I think the large number of immigrants arriving in Sweden has actually tested Swedish people, and somehow their true colors now is becoming more apparent. The so-called tolerant facade that they had has now disappeared. It was just a veneer.
Well, look, I think you should be a little bit cautious with making a decision.
No, I haven't finished yet. I haven't finished yet.
Yeah, but before you say it, I just want to say...
The sentence needs to be completed, otherwise I'll be in trouble. What we are seeing is this facade that we have seen amongst a particular band of people has shifted, and they apparently, or somehow, won 3 seats in the parliament extra. Just by 3, they've been able to form a coalition government. Now, this is a problem. It's no different to America. If 49% of Americans voted for Donald Trump, that is frightening. And if a small number of people in Sweden, from which was a very liberal country, can vote a right-wing party even by 3 extra seats, that's very frightening to me.
Let's be clear about the numbers. The Social Democrat Party has got historical ties with neo-Nazis. Everybody in Sweden knows it. They won 20% of the vote.
Very
that is
scary.
Quite extreme. And
we have the same in France. Marie Le Pen, she got more than 40% of the votes. So it's a right-wing person receiving half of the votes of the country.
In contrast to, only mildly in contrast, I would suggest that it's not about the population suddenly showing their true colours, but it's very easy for lunatics like this Erasmus fellow to stir up hatred. They've done it in the UK. You may remember just before Brexit, you had people out protesting with banners. It's very easy to stir the most base core feelings of people of xenophobia and bigotry in any European society. And that's what's been happening.
I want to contrast that with the counter-contrasting argument. I met a member of European Parliament, MEP, in Strasbourg many years ago. He was from Netherlands. And we sat down, we were having lunch. And he said to me, Ajmal, when push becomes shove in Europe, and when we're looking for the enemy, when we're looking for the other, don't be surprised if we pick up the machine guns, you'd be our target. And I said to him, why do you say that? He goes, because Europe has a nasty streak that lies underneath the surface. And every few hundred years or few decades, it comes to the surface and it boils over, and there's an outbursts. That wasn't long ago when the Nazi Germany had orchestrated the awful crime against the Jewish communities. And this guy was a very senior MEP. He was telling me, get ready, and I'm telling you this honestly, get ready to face Europe, because that dirty side will become very visible very soon. Guess what? France, Netherlands, Belgium, countries that I never expected, even Holland, I'd never expected to go right-wing has gone right-wing.
You know, there was I remember a professor at one of the Irish universities wrote a book called Suspect Communities, and he was talking all about the Irish, but I remember him attending a conference, and he quite openly admitted that the new suspect community was the Muslim community. And that was with the war on terror over a 10, 12-year period. We had in this country the most repressive, racist, Islamophobic legislation being put on the books under the banner of Prevent, cameras being set up in cities across Birmingham, where Muslim communities on the whole were being monitored and managed. And the language adopted by our mainstream press, by documentaries, and even individuals, I'm not going to mention names there, but individuals who supposedly were from black Asian backgrounds were being paid for the likes of the Daily Mail to write negative articles attacking the Muslim community. Now, this is a phenomena which has overwhelmed most of Europe and America. Islamophobia exists in a very major way. And yes, they will be the subject for attack, the other, as Ajmal put it, once economic conditions become severe, once people start to worry about their jobs, worry about how they're heating, the cost of living crisis, it's historic. They will always target the other.
I would like to make two more points, if I may. So one is burning the Quran is nothing new. It happens. It started in the Middle Ages. Yeah. So if you look back into 1498, Reconquista in Andalusia, where they pushed out the Muslims, the Jews who were actually welcomed by the Khalifa in Istanbul. Most of the Jews fled into to Istanbul. Qurans were burned in their thousands back then, and it occurred again and again. Heinrich Heine, the German writer, he said, dort wo man Bücher verbrennt, verbrennt man auch Menschen. Where you burn books, later on they will also start burning human beings too. So, and it happened in Germany. It happened, and who says that it won't happen again? So here we are, 60, 80 years after the Second World War, and we are starting to burn books again. We've got Islamophobic attacks, people burning mosques. I think there were like more than 200-300 attacks on mosques in Germany alone last year, and across Europe. And I think that's the second point I want to make is it also, in parallel, we're seeing the population becoming less and less interested in religion. So just recently, the
census.
The census was
showed that how
announced.
people who didn't identify with the religion
exactly.
had
I think
increased
1/3 of the British population is describe themselves as non-religious. So therefore, religious values or attacking religious values is not being seen as a big act of crime in vast majority or vast parts of the European population. And I think people with a background like ourselves, we feel hurt. It's sacred to us. You're attacking or burning a book which is sacred to 2 billion people in the world.
Well, let's not forget that the center of the defense for these people and for the Swedish government at the moment is this idea of freedom of speech.
Which they changed in 2017. Yes. Up until then, for more than 300 years, it was a crime to attack religious values. Only in 2017, they legalized it.
Yes. Well, look, so this issue has been bandied about.
But Carl, I understand that you're sort of assuming devil's advocates here but truly freedom of speech could be expressed in other more
as the Pope
more
said,
humane.
You may remember during the Charlie Hebdo incident, the Pope actually came out and said, "Look, freedom of speech does not give you a license to offend." Exactly. He said, "If you insult my mother, I'll punch you on the nose." This was the Pope saying that, and so
there was a movement, Carl, who wanted to say, "I have the right to offend." I remember this. I remember being interviewed by one British journalist. He said, "What's wrong with me wanting to offend? Why should my right to offend be taken away just because you find it offensive?" I'm not even bothered by that anymore. I'll tell you what I'm bothered by is the significance of book burning, Qur'an burning. In 1987, when we were at the forefront of Salman Rushdie's demonstration, I was a 16-year-old kid. I was roused by my elders to go to the demonstration, and I went to Hyde Park Corner, and I saw with my own eyes the effigy of Salman Rushdie and the book being burned. I felt disgusted by seeing the book being burned because I never liked the book burning episode. I now even regret going to that demonstration because the message we had given as Muslim community is that people who are interested in burning a book are actually an unsophisticated people who are not interested in proliferating education. Forget about proliferating education. They're not even interested in promoting education. They can go down to the level of burning books that symbolizes education. Now, if that's how Muslims were termed in the 80s and the 90s, and even in the new millennium, that Muslims need to exorcise their demon that possessed them to burn a book, how comes now the entire European intelligentsia, intelligent people of university colleges, all the intellectuals, the politicians, are silent about the Qur'an burning that also symbolizes the same thing. Uncivilized,
You're absolutely right.
unsophisticated, and no interest in education.
And by the way, I'm absolutely with you. I see burning of books of any sort, of any kind, an abhorrent act. It disgusts me to the core. But let me, try to highlight that the probably different element in this particular case was that this took place in front of the Turkish embassy. Okay. Now, for me, this symbolizes two things. Firstly, I think it gives rise to the question, was this a political act or was this some sort of ideological anti-religious act? That's one thing. But the other thing is that it's, Ufuk, you're Turkish. And, I think, and I said this on a program yesterday, and I had a Turkish colleague on the panel. And I said, Turkey must really be honored by the fact that for someone to really want to hurt Turkey, they burn the Quran. That's the association, that Turkey holds the Quran dear, and therefore to hurt Turkey, you burn the Quran. That kind of association, that's something to be proud of.
You would actually rile up the secularists in Turkey, that kind of association.
I agree. I think it's very telling why they did it in front of the Turkish embassy, and the timing as well. So it's one day before the Swedish defense minister was supposed to pay a visit to Ankara. Obviously, that was cancelled. There was a strong condemnation by several ministers of the Turkish cabinet, including President Erdogan, who condemned this vicious attack of our religion. And also the response was clear. Sweden can forget the NATO membership unless certain circumstances are met, certain criteria are met, which had been agreed between Turkey, Finland, NATO, and Sweden. Unless those are met, Sweden will not be able to join NATO because Turkey is using its right of vetoing it. And I think we should also ask the question: who actually benefits from such Qur'an burning?
Sweden, it's not like this. It's not like this furthered the cause of Sweden.
Who's benefiting?
I'll tell you who's the benefactor: Muslims.
But you asked the question earlier.
I disagree. I disagree.
Hold on.
Hang on. This is interesting.
The reason why Muslims are benefactors. First, the Quran, if his intention was to obliterate it, he's the biggest fool on the face of this earth. You cannot obliterate Quran by burning millions. The British did when they went to India. They tried to burn the Quran, but somebody told them, hey, Quran is in the memories of people. Recite it every day. So that's number one. Number two, by burning the Quran, millions of copies of the Quran was downloaded over that week on the internet, and I saw the stats. Number three, more copies of the Quran across the globe were sold. Number four, every household suddenly heard, oh, there is a book called Quran, let me go and read it. I believe it's a great dawah opportunity, an opportunity for your job, PR, and PR done by somebody that I couldn't even do.
Let me put it to you that there's another spin on this, is that we're in the middle of a major conflict in Europe. There's the Ukraine-Russia war, which some would describe as a NATO-Russia war, and you have a lot of countries in the Middle East have been forming alliances with Russia, putting their fingers up effectively to Biden, and Turkey plays quite a very serious role in the developments of that particular conflict. And I find it interesting that what might have passed as an incident that hardly gathered much momentum in the press has suddenly become quite a big flared incident at this time, and it has conveniently allowed Mr. Erdogan to threaten to disconnect from Sweden and potentially Finland, and to refuse to avoid using his veto for
It
NATO.
confirms my case again,
Yes.
and that is Erdogan has benefited, like he did with the Syrian migrant, told the Europeans, we'll open the door unless you negotiate. Europeans had to fall on their knees and negotiate. He's telling the Swedish people the same thing. You better negotiate, otherwise we're going to say no.
I think clearly who benefits from that incident is Russia. So Russia, obviously, why did the war start? So they feel that NATO is too close to its area of influence, to its borders, because they started this foolish war with Ukraine. Finland and Sweden applied to join the NATO, and now how can they stop? How can they stop Finland and Sweden to join NATO? So they're using somehow trying to create a problem, differences between Turkey.
This is an interesting theory. Do you think they paid Faludan to burn it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
I think just today there was some news that some Swedish journalists who used to work for RT paid actually for Rasmus
and his
public
tickets,
statement.
his airline tickets.
So-
I heard the same.
So I think
heard the same.
This is interesting.
Yeah,
I
heard
think
the same.
overall only Russia gains from this. I mean, what is Turkey's benefit of Sweden not joining the NATO? I think Turkey overall is okay for Sweden to.
Well, the
Un-
Turkish
un- until
complaint
until
is that Sweden is harboring the PKK
but
terrorists.
it's an opportunity for Erdogan.
It's a negotiation
Exactly,
thing.
yeah.
Basically, Turkey can sort of push for
Which is what he has been doing.
many of its interests.
So whilst there's a very good scope for a lovely conspiracy theory that Erdogan was behind.
Not
No,
Erdogan.
Putin.
Putin.
Not
or
Erdogan.
Putin even.
Not Erdogan. Putin.
Well, that's okay. That's
Plausible.
particularly impressive an idea. But you've got to remember, of course, that this whole issue, this Islamophobic issue, which underlies all of this. It goes back to the cartoon. One moment, the cartoon crisis. Do you remember? I remember at the channel that I worked with, we even hosted a conference in Copenhagen to challenge the Islamophobic concepts. And the strong argument that was being put forward was that they have got a right to post a picture of the Prophet, peace be upon him, on the front pages of their newspapers, even with a time bomb on his head. And Sweden was totally in unison with them. They were arguing that they should have the right to do this, and that they have the right to offend. And I'm sorry to bring us back to this, but there is that current that exists in Sweden and has done for some time. And in a way, France has also had that resistance to any particular faith or any particular movement trying to dictate what they can and cannot say. So we can't avoid dealing with an argument. It is there. It's part of the discourse, even though there may be other motives and various other tendencies, even if one of them is Putin being directly involved. I suspect.
I understand that point, and I think there is an important element to discuss. But I don't want to give too much credit to this lunatic Faludan. I don't think he's got the brain to be so sophisticated. This is me being facetious here. But if we were to say, okay, he doesn't have the brain, and if we were to say what happened around the cartoon saga around the Prophet was actually unifying the liberal who wanted to flex their muscles and wanted to push the boundaries, and they did successfully at that time. What's happened now, Islamophobia has become fashionable. It's become dinner table banter. It's acceptable to be talking against Muslims in the most disgusting way at home. So if European culture was to be analyzed now, if I was to take a fine line, draw a fine line, and I wanted to say, and I wanted to explore to what degree are the Europeans now actually openly and clearly anti-Muslim, I would say the number is rising every day.
Well, I'm going to expand on that and say just racist. Do you remember when the Ukraine war conflict broke out, the stories which seeped into the press of black people and Asians in Ukraine being kicked off the buses that they were on, being denied a chance to get away from the bombing, and then those that did manage to get through were then being sectioned off and sent to what was effectively concentration camps, while the white, blonde, blue-eyed Ukrainians were being welcomed with flowers and garlands.
Did you take exception to my statement, the true color of Europeans are truly coming out earlier on? This is what I meant. So the more we analyzed what's happening in France, what's happening in Holland, what's happening in Sweden, even Norway, people are migrating from those countries looking for an alternative space. A lot of them are coming to the UK. There is a deep-seated Islamophobia. There is racism. And that's what I was referring to. And if we're not very careful, and if we don't prepare ourselves to face possible trouble in the future, and I'm talking about tragedies in the future, I think it will just catch us. And that's my
Do you
worry.
do you think that there is a possibility, probably even a probability, that same incidents will occur beyond Sweden, maybe even here in the UK?
Well, it already happened in Netherlands 2 days ago, where this guy tore the Quran apart into pieces. So copycat activities. I mean, it's been now legal, isn't it? It's fashionable, as Ajmal said. It's fashionable now to burn the Quran, tore it into parts, stamp on it. But I would like to draw the attention also to the double standards, to the hypocrisy. So on the one hand, freedom of expression. You are allowed to burn the Quran, offend 2 billion people. But what happens if, we saw it even during the World Cup in Qatar. So when a lot of the Moroccan team members or the fans were using putting up the Palestinian flag, that was suddenly
was seen as
offensive.
something which is offensive.
It's offensive. Yes. Or what would happen? What would be the reaction if we suddenly started to burn, for example, the Israeli flag? I'm not condoning such acts, but would the reaction be the same? Would you actually be allowed publicly to burn?
Let's discuss this.
Yeah.
Let's discuss this. How should Muslim communities in the West? I mean, the anger is global. I get messages from across, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from parts of Argentina. I've had several messages from the Muslim communities over there saying, what are you going to do about this?
But hasn't this anger, Anas, hasn't this anger been there since my childhood, your childhood? Nothing has changed. What we should do, in my view, to prepare for the future is firstly to understand what's really causing this. And I believe what's causing this is, in some ways, our collective failure as Muslims. We haven't presented Islam adequately to the wider world. Let me ask you, all three of us, a question, or myself too. If a non-Muslim was interested in Islam, what English book would you give them as a present, which would be comprehensive enough for you to feel comfortable enough to go and read this book? I can't name you one. Can you name me one? No. So if we were that good in presenting Islam to the wider society in which we live, whether it is UK or Europe, we would have seen at least a reduction in the misinformation and ignorance that prevails today. That's number one. Number two, if you were to go to if you were to go to France and you would go to some of the outskirts suburbs or inner cities where the Muslims live, and you look at the state of those areas, the crime, the open selling of drugs, weapons. When I went to Netherlands, I saw the same thing. We have been an awful representative of Islam when we are in Europe. That's the second. Third, the millions of Muslims who have migrated from Syria and other parts of the world, I don't have a problem with them migrating anywhere they wanted. But why were the Muslim nations opening their arms and saying, my brothers and sisters, come to our country. We'll give you the same asylum status that you would get in Europe. We'll give you the same human dignity and rights that you would get in Europe. Nobody seeks asylum in Arab countries. They come to Europe because in Europe they find true Islam.
And because the actual natives of those countries you're talking of are themselves oppressed.
Absolutely. So these are the three factors, in my view, that we need to really assess before we start blaming or pointing fingers at the Europeans. Not that I'm saying the blame should not be apportioned. We got to prepare our own ground.
But going back to this other word, which is racism per se, it doesn't just affect Muslims. I'm a black person. I can tell you there's a history of racism in this country. When blacks came here, whether from the Caribbean or elsewhere in the 50s, they were confronted with signs saying no Irish, no dogs, and no blacks. And you had in Smethwick a Conservative Party election campaign which said, if you want a nigger for a neighbour, vote Labour. I mean, that was tolerated. So it is not just an Islamophobic issue, and that's one crucial component to this debate. It is an innate racism and supremacy that exists. Today, as that wonderful poet wrote who was in a Dachau concentration camp, Pastor Numawa, he said, today they come for the trade unionists. I wasn't one of them, so I did nothing. Tomorrow they came for the communists. I wasn't a communist, so I did nothing. They came for the Jews, and then you know the poem. The reality is that innate racism exists, and it won't just be Muslims who are being targeted. It won't just be Jews who will be persecuted. It won't just be blacks kicked off the buses and denigrated and discredited, or who die in large numbers during a pandemic because they don't receive equal medical care or treatment. This has to be confronted in a much wider way. And it's not just about Muslims being prepared or blacks just being prepared. We need to educate and inform. We need to have some control on the means
Educate
of
and inform
information.
Who? Ourselves? Because Ejmel said we need to look inside, we need to educate
So that's
ourselves.
the one step.
all the
But
stuff.
I do
But
want
who
to.
else?
I do want to challenge Carl on this, because Carl, this to me is downplaying the menacing Islamophobia that Muslims are facing.
Don't regard that I'm doing that at all.
No, let me explain why I say that. Because racism has been dealt a severe blow in Europe, especially in the UK, in a way that I have myself experienced in the 70s, I no longer experience. Whereas Islamophobia is slightly different. It's not just racism, it's embedded in a deep-seated hatred of a religion, an ideology that people are afraid of. What are they afraid of? Islam is promoting a particular way of life that wants you to give up selfishness, wants you to give up greed, wants you to share your wealth, wants you to give up on alcohol, womanizing, wants you to give up those fetishes that you love so much. I'm talking about the Western world. This is a direct ideological lifestyle threat. Nobody's going to take that lying down. It's not the same thing as being prejudiced about my color or about my culture. Even if I was to overcome the issues of, say, for example, creating a wider platform to fight against this prejudice, you cannot ignore the elephant in the room. Islam is uncompromising on these issues.
Well, look, Asmal, and I hate that phrase with the greatest of respect. I hate it, but I don't know why I use
because
it. But
whatever comes after is...
Go for it.
Yeah, but I've spent the last 20 or 25 years challenging Islamophobia. I mean, so I regard myself as something of an authority also on this issue. However, what I'm trying to say here is that whether your ideology is one of peace and at odds with so many elements of Western,
I call it
excess.
irreconcilable differences.
I don't think most Western individuals understand that. They're not aware of the full raft of wonderful characteristics of Islamic thinking and the way of life, the challenges. They don't know about it. As you were pointing out earlier,
We didn't present it well. Yes.
They're ignorant to it. What they are responding to is not the ideology, not the way of life, not the faith principles that exist in Islam. They're reacting to the other. These are other people. They look different from us. They're not blue-eyed and blonde-haired. They're not Europeans, and so they are.
And they're growing in numbers.
And they're growing numbers, and they're invading our territory. And so they don't really care about your the concept of your faith.
So we are. I think I agree. We're doing a bad job in explaining ourselves. We should be more outspoken. We should participate more in public life. I think if we are honest to ourselves, a lot of the Muslims in Europe, they, when they go to work, where do they socialize? Who do they meet? How often do they have interactions with their neighbors? Do they have actually non-Muslim friends? How many of them? I think we need to look inside ourselves as well. How much work do we do in the community? We need to be more part and parcel of the communities where we live in, so people actually understand why we're doing certain things. Why do we go to 5 times prayer? Why is the Quran so important to us? Why do we feel actually offended? These open mosque days, etc. Visit my mosque. We do it in the UK. In Germany, it has been running for more than 25 years. These are important things, but we need to do more of them. We need to explain ourselves. We need to participate in roundtables. We need to be everywhere. Otherwise, the other person who is has got this deep anti-Muslim hatred is going to succeed spreading their lies and their slur.
But I'll tell you what, Ufuk, let me just pause for a few minutes in defense the Muslim community a little bit, and I totally accept what Ajmal you said and what you've added. But ultimately speaking, what I, as a British Muslim, seek is respect. That's all I want. I just want to be respected. I just want to be counted as part and parcel of my society. Why? I mean, let me pose myself on the other side. I'm standing on the other shore and looking onto the Muslim community. Why should the Muslim community do all of this? Why?
Yeah, very simple. Because I'm
a human being.
No, but
I mean, why can't I be accepted?
No, because I have come here. I've come here and I'm claiming to be different. Now, this is the problem. The problem is you've identified yourself.
Different from whom?
From everybody else. I'm a Muslim by the fact that you have a defined identity by your religious belief, whereas majority of the people of this country are no longer identifying themselves with their faith by census data.
But Hindus aren't treated like Muslims.
Muslims are the most defining. Muslims use Islam as the most defining feature of their faith. Vast majority of us call Muslims. So if you're going to be claiming to be Muslim, you better tell us what is it that you are defining yourself by, number one. Number two, you better be, and this is where I agree with Ufuk, and of course I think there is a connection here in what you said. I think we are absent from the decision-making processes and the round tables that you talk about. An example, if I want to become a parliamentarian, I stood in the parliamentary election twice, and the thing that I've learned is staggering. Unless I'm willing to compromise on my fundamental principles of my faith, many political parties have massive walls up in front of me. I will not be able to climb them. Unless I'm able to submit to the way of those parties, I will not be promoted. I will never be given a safe seat. I will always be the last choice or no choice. How do I live in an environment where I want to be respected, but there are barriers upon barriers being put in front of me by institutions, by political parties, that I can't even overcome? So that's my biggest complaint. On one hand, I'm criticizing Muslims, but on the other hand, I'm also criticizing the institutions. I belonged to Liberal Democrats for a long period. I resigned because I said, I can't go any further than where I've gone. You guys will not allow me to sit around. You will be sitting in a meeting where I will not be allowed. So this institutional racism, as you put it, institutional Islamophobia that we put it, unless we're able to challenge them, and unless we stand in front of them and say, no more, nothing is going to change.
I accept all of that. But once again, we are citizens of this country. And I'm talking about all Muslims in whatever, European country they happen to be. I can try to advocate and to promote and to try to enlighten regarding my beliefs and my set of values and the such. But it's not incumbent, and it shouldn't be incumbent upon me that the other is convinced. I can only, وَمَا عَلَيْكَ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. Even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was told that you only have to, promote your message. But then, whether the other accepts or otherwise is not down to me. The problem that we have today, I see it, is that we are overreaching, Ajmal. You gave the example of yourself and your position within the Lib Dems. And there are scores of other examples of people who tried and tried and tried. And even those who, let's say, played fast and loose with their values and their religion even and their principles, without naming names, they also ended up nowhere. So the thing is, it's like someone somewhere is sending a message to Muslims that you can't win. You can't win. You have a place.
Did you see that interview? It was an interview or a piece that I read where Saida Warsi. It's okay. It's important that she wrote it in her book. She became the chairwoman of the Conservative Party. But within the Conservative Party, there were two wings. There was Michael Gove's wing, which wanted Saida Warsi nowhere near political power. And then there was the Prime Minister, what's his name? David Cameron's wing, who was very close to Saida Warsi and wanted to promote Saida Warsi and the likes. Guess who won? It was Michael Gove's wing and his political think tank that railroaded and almost took over the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, in the Labour Party, the same thing has happened. In the Lib Dems, the same thing has happened. So anybody who is anybody within the Muslim community, they can only go so far. You can be a councillor, that's okay. We'll give you a seat, stay there. You can be an Asian as long as you like, but don't come to the parliament and talk about Islam. Now that's unacceptable, Anas. I'm not going to sit here and tolerate it.
Absolutely.
But look, I just want to...
just on this note, before I allow you, Carl, allow me. But what you ended with is crucial. That we mustn't accept this, and we mustn't accept this. By the way, what I think, not for the sake of me being a Muslim or belonging to a Muslim community, we mustn't accept this for the sake of our society and of our country. Because if you allow anyone to be maligned or marginalized or denigrated or whatever, in whatever sense, whether it be politically or economically or socially or intellectually, you are forsaking the stability and the very fabric of society and basically threatening everyone's future security.
I think giving up is no choice. I think we need to be in those meetings. We need to be in those councils. We need to. How many of the Muslim population in Europe is actually member of a political party? How many of us? I mean, it doesn't take much to swing the vote in one direction. You know, these small local memberships, there are like in these meetings, there are like 15, 15, 20 people who regularly take part in meetings. You know, you can put forward a resolution, and if 5, 6, 7 people join the local party, you can swing it easily into one direction. So, but we are just sitting back, complaining, you know, writing WhatsApp messages in groups. But who's actually taking who's actually writing an email to his MP?
And the irony,
talking to the MP, requesting a response.
The irony is that within certain Muslim communities, I'm thinking also the Bangladeshi community in particular, it's actually the ones who are the worst detractors and who undermine their colleagues who try to get involved are people from their own community. It's so often the case. It's terribly sad. But what
we are our worst enemies.
Sorry, but I'm going to go back to this point. You know, I tended.
I think we've left Sweden a long time ago.
No, we were not that.
We're coming back. We're coming back to it.
My sister's a councillor in Westminster. She's in a ward which historically 60 years they've never had a Labour councillor in that ward, and she managed to break through, and the first ever councillor, first ever black councillor in that ward, but also the first Labour in that ward. So, and the reason she was successful was that she galvanised the minority communities in that ward and showed them that they could make a difference by taking part in the process. Yeah. So for the first time ever, those people got out of their beds and voted. And because that was one of the big problems. It's not just in Westminster, it's across the country. People of colour, Muslims, people of faith, minority groups feel they're disenfranchised. They feel they've got no power, no ability to change, and so they stay out of the system. They don't participate in voting. It's historically the case. We need to change that. We need to empower them and help them to empower themselves. They need to participate in the democratic process. They need to be involved in government. And they need to stand against any charges of so-called entryism that so often is put against them. And that's the only way we're going to change.
And we also, Muslims need to be part of actually defining the parameters of the likes of freedom of speech and freedom of expression and such. I'll be honest. I mean, with taking on board all the frailties, all the weaknesses, all the shortcomings, you and I, Ajmal, have had so many discussions about this within the Muslim community. But I have to say that in light of both the Charlie Hebdo episode, the Danish cartoons, and this recent burning of the Qur'an by this racist, I'm actually quite proud of European Muslims. Because I was fearful when I first heard of this. I was fearful that we were going to see, burning of flags everywhere. We're going to see probably ransacking of shops and public malls and public squares and the such. But we didn't. We didn't.
And that's something. Quiet. And that's something. Astonishingly quiet.
And that's something. Actually, that's something to behold, and that's something to be extremely proud of. I think.
And we need to celebrate that.
Absolutely.
Because this is a sign of evolution and maturity within ourselves. We now know what not to do. So we were incompetent before. unconsciously incompetent. Now we've become consciously incompetent. We don't know. Well, now we do. And this is very good. Mosques have not riled up people. I haven't seen fatwas lying around. In fact, what we have done instead is said, okay, why don't we take 1,000 copies and stand outside Swedish embassy in London,
absolutely.
and let's give out the
Give
Quran
out,
to everybody with
Someone-
baklavas
so- someone-
and Ras Malai and everything else.
Someone
heard it here
today,
first, folks.
someone today tweeted a suggestion saying, Swedish translations of the Holy Quran should be given out for
They
free.
did in the Turkish community did in Sweden. They were giving it out, and they were giving out carnation flowers to everybody.
And read out the Quran, recite the Quran in front of the embassies. Just that's the
So the
proper
confident
reaction.
Muslim identity. This is the point I wanted to finish my thoughts with. Confident Muslim identity is what will win the day. If we can be confident in our faith, if we can be confident enough and not arrogant about it, if we integrate sufficiently, and if we are part and parcel, not only in our word but in our action of the entire society, I think things will change.
But I think you need to add to that, to this point. The fact is that, and I hope I'm not going to offend anybody by saying this.
You're allowed to offend.
Am I? but over the many decades, I have to sometimes come to the conclusion that there are many Muslims who have no clue about their own faith.
Oh, that's absolutely right.
And there's a fundamental need for Muslims to be educated, not only about their own history, but about the fundamental principles of Islamic thinking. I remember when we went to do that conference on the Islamophobia in Copenhagen as the cartoon crisis broke, we met some Muslims in Denmark in a hotel lobby. And there they sat. And these were the sort of self-appointed spokespeople for the Muslim community. And there they said, they called themselves moderate Muslims. And already my hair was back, on the back of my neck was already up when I listened to their categorization. And then they went on to say, well, Muslims are a real plague on the welfare system here in Denmark. And I could not believe that these, in inverted commas, moderate Muslims were sort of
attacking their own.
Picking up language that was on the front page of the Daily Mail or the equivalent in Denmark, and they were believing in it themselves. And in the end, after I had sort of later discussions with the CEO of the channel, we came to the conclusion that the Danish Muslims do not have the sophisticated networks that we have in London. They don't have the MCBs and the MABs. They don't have open debates and TV networks and channels. And clearly there was a desperate need for education amongst Muslim communities there. But it also relates to Muslim communities here in the UK. We've got lunatics and extremists.
I dare say more than 80% of British Muslims have very little knowledge about their own faith. I compare it with most Muslim communities' knowledge is knowledge of primary school level. Very few of them actually have gone to secondary school level, and yet they should actually be having at least A-level standard of Islam within their knowledge capacity. It's lacking. And that's the challenge we need to obviously overcome. But with Sweden, I think racism, you said, Islamophobia, institutional, with the change in politics going to the right, is very alarming and worrying. We should all try and go there as often as we can. And try and bring that dialogue, start having an engagement with Swedish people. They speak perfectly good English. They don't need any translators. We should go there as often as we can.
And by the way, there are many Muslim organizations there that are well-meaning, but they lack either the human resources or the confidence or even probably the knowledge. And I think that yourself, Ajmal, and anyone who goes over there should connect with those organizations, and we should try to build a network. And this doesn't only stop in Sweden. This needs to happen in Denmark. It needs to happen in France. It needs to happen in Belgium. It needs to happen in Holland and all the countries where the rise of the far right, the rise of racism, the rise of fascism, the rise of xenophobia is there for all to see.
Before this segment finishes, Anas, I think it's important for us also to take note of a very racist, Islamophobic press that we have to deal with, the media that largely has been anti-Muslim and anti-others. Yeah. Historically, when it goes back to the war on the Jews and others, certain newspapers have been consistent in attacking those other communities. And they play a major role in stirring up hatred, stirring up and taking advantage of ignorance of the mass population. We need to be aware of this and find ways of directly challenging it. Well, I'm not just necessarily saying that you need to be suing the newspapers every time they publish something that is derogatory, whether they say Muslims are demanding Christmas is cancelled or whatever the headlines that they have. But we need to be able to have something either to attack it with, to rebut those arguments.
Or it could work if you have a newspaper. I think you should start a newspaper and have these kind of very provocative articles as its headline. Muslims want to cancel Christmas, and then write down the truth underneath it. Muslims don't like Europe, write down the truth.
It's like clickbait.
Yeah, I think so. I think like the other tabloid newspapers, they use this tactic to get the people. I think it's a massive challenge, but we can overcome it. I am forever hopeful. I think Sweden will change. And I think the best outcome of this Erasmus guy, or whatever his name is, Rasmus, is that more people will be interested in Islam and more people will actually find Islam interesting.
Well, I think Sweden probably will regret that they haven't banned this public burning. I think they hid behind the laws of freedom of expression, etc. But I think overall they will regret that they have actually allowed for this to happen. I think the Muslim community's reaction was pretty quiet, very calm. But I'm not seeing, that we are writing to newspapers. We are not petitioning. We are not contacting people in power, trying to stop this, because it happened in Sweden. It might happen next day, tomorrow in London,